Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Shh, shh, like Silent Night, shh. Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Byron Radcliffe. I am the Vice President for Development at the QED Group, and I'm the Chairman of the Board of SID, Washington. And on behalf of the Board of Directors of SID, we would like to welcome you to tonight's gala. Tonight we gather to honor Asif Sheikh, who's a thought leader and innovator in international development and a person who has been very heavily involved in the growth of SID Washington. We're also delighted tonight to have George Ingram as our Master of Ceremonies. Many in this room know George through his work as a senior fellow at the Brookings Institute, as a leader at USGLC, and from his previous work on the Hill and with USAID. In addition to that, we have two outstanding speakers. We have Aaron Williams, who's the Executive Vice President at RTI International and former Director of the Peace Corps, and Dr. Janetta Cole, who's the Director of the Smithsonian Museum of African Art. And before going any farther in the program, we want to thank some of our sponsors for tonight's events. All of our sponsors are in the program, and we thank you all. But there are a few that we would like to just single out, and I'm going to ask Catherine Ralston, the President of SID, to speak for a moment.
Thank you, Byron. Many of you in this room are responsible for helping us put on this event tonight, and we're grateful to all of you. I'd like to mention quickly the entire SID Washington staff, all 5 of them. Thank you to all of you for tending to every detail, even as I speak. I also want to acknowledge our Diamond, Platinum, and Gold level sponsors. At the Diamond level, we have Apt Associates, we have Arizona State University, and we have Agility. At the Platinum level, we have DAI, and at the Gold level, we have ACOM, Chemonics, CH2M Hill, and LMI. We're very grateful to you and to all of our sponsors here tonight. Thank you.
Okay. Before going to the main event of tonight's evening, the SID board wants to take a moment to recognize and thank Dan Runde, who was my predecessor as chairman of the board. And Dan served as chairman for nearly 3 years and during a period of great change and growth for SID Washington. And we could spend all night talking about all the work that Dan did for SID, and it was hours and hours and hours. But one thing I want to bring out in particular is his vision and leadership on putting together the 2011 SID World Congress. This was a huge feat, and it brought together SID chapters from all over the world and over 1,000 attendees. Dan's vision, strength, and energy brought it all together. So the board would now like to recognize Dan for all of his work and efforts on behalf of SID. Sorry.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Byron. Thanks a lot. Thank you very much. Thanks, Byron. Thanks, Catherine. SID Washington is in great hands with this leadership team and this great board. I want to congratulate Asif Sheikh as well. Asif, you're a great leader. You're a really modeled servant leadership for me. And it was a real privilege. I always will be grateful that you asked me to serve on the SID Washington board, and thanks for all of your support all this time. You're a great friend and colleague. And I also think this recognition also recognizes more broadly the broader development community, and so I think it's a really wonderful night, and it's a wonderful way to celebrate someone who I think is a great, committed American internationalist who believes that the shared prosperity of all is our shared prosperity, and so I think that that's what development is all about, and so I'm very honored to be here with you as well. I just want to take 1 second to remember another committed American internationalist who died on Sunday, my very good friend, Ambassador Rich Williamson, who was the special envoy for Sudan under President Bush and served 3 presidents and worked in a bipartisan way in the same spirit as Asif Sheikh. And so I know Rich is with us in spirit tonight, and so I didn't want to let this opportunity pass to just recognize my good friend Rich Williamson as well. Thank you. Congratulations, Asif.
So please enjoy your dinner and the conversations at your tables, and we will reconvene in 40 minutes.
but I can hear you. And I'm instructed to ask you to tone down your conversations. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. I'm George Ingram. And first of all, I'd like to thank Byron and Catherine for inviting me to be part of this evening's program. It's a particular honor and privilege as SID plays such an important role for our community in providing opportunities for professional development, forums to understand and exchange views on critical development issues, and knitting together disparate elements of the community as is happening tonight. It is my role to say a few words about our honoree and introduce the two principal speakers. Asif's professional role is well known to this audience, so there's no need to read his illustrious resume. But I want to highlight a few of his noteworthy character traits and contributions to our community. The summation of all that I will say about Asif is that he is a man of many and well-balanced facets, a range of facets that normally takes half a dozen people to compile. And he has consistently been ahead of the curve on development thinking. If Asif defines himself in any way, it's as an observer. I would add the other adjective and talent of a listener, something that is all too rare in Washington. He explains that half of his first 11 years was spent in hospitals, dealing with a dysfunctional stomach. And in that process, he spent a lot of time watching what was going on around him. He applied that talent in his first professional assignment in the field, analyzing renewable energy opportunities in Botswana. He quickly realized that the cook stove that was being pushed by his colleagues and development experts, because it had worked in other countries, was not relevant to the needs and the business model that he found in Botswana. This was the beginning of what would be a long history of field engagements in which Asif was always operated from the perspective of what is financially operational and functional at the local level, and to Asif being a long-time practitioner of listening to local needs and voices. Asif started his professional career in academia in his early 30s, having to try to figure out how to teach college economics in Niger. This academic grounding and field experience has produced a combination that is all too rare in development. There are lots of people who know implementation, lots of people who know policy, but Asif uniquely combines both skills, producing what we have too little of, and that is field-grounded policy analysis and policy-guided implementation. So Asif is a thinker who is a doer. He is a practitioner and an author who can translate his experiences and observations into writing and policy that serves to guide us all. Just a few examples, which this crowd should value, of his thinking that has consistently been ahead of the curve. He has long been an advocate of the critical role of the private sector, but always arguing for inclusive growth that reaches the poor. He has been concerned that growing inequality and the ability of modern communications to make that inequality known to those on the short end of the stick will lead developing countries to be ungovernable. So good governance is fundamental to development. He has articulated that development solutions must be financially feasible and empower both men and women. He views donors as minority shareholders in development, and it is time they acted accordingly. And finally, he understands that development is more than just assistance, and that the U.S. must move beyond foreign assistance to global engagement. This practically grounded intellectual capacity has led to his recruitment as a principal in the Modernizing Foreign Assistance Network, a senior advisor at CSIS, a member of a host of advisory groups, including for the White House. With more time, I would expand on his other character traits. He is a manager who is also a leader, as demonstrated by his leadership of SID. He is a forceful leader with a heart, a diplomat with frankness, and a teacher who has never stopped being a student. Now to our first speaker, Aaron Williams. Like Asif, needs little introduction to this audience, as he is very much a part of this community and was the 2010 SID honoree. It is fitting that these individuals are both before us tonight, as they both are unsurpassed pillars of the development community. They have similar traits of integrity and frankness and combine intellectual prowess with practical experience and have a quiet and even humble but commanding style that leads them to be sought after for positions of leadership. Aaron's humility is noted in his remaining appalled, even amazed that a kid from the south side of Chicago could find himself as Peace Corps director in the presidential palace in Manila, talking to President Aquino, born 50 years earlier at the birth of the Peace Corps, exclaiming how he grew up with Peace Corps volunteers who were frequent visitors to the presidential palace when his mother was president. Now, Aaron, I have to ask you a question. I have to ask you a question about the magic of the water or the air, or maybe the schools in the south side of Chicago in the 1950s and 60s. How close to 45th and South Park Road, now called King Drive, did you grow up? And I think the answer is 3 blocks, right, Aaron? 3 blocks. I learned last Friday evening in a chance encounter with Herbie Hancock that 2 other American greats who also have a name for themselves internationally were born on the south side at 45th and South Park Road, Herbie Hancock and Morgan Freeman. And that you and that noted diplomat Johnny Carson attended the same high school in the South Side. It appears that the South Side has produced its share of notables. I doubt there's a person in this room who did not have some strong personal feeling this past week. Likely a feeling of loss, but also of great joy over the unparalleled contribution to world justice on the passing of Nelson Mandela. I dare say we have no greater leader or icon for justice in the world in our time. Well, for that same Southside kid to be USAID mission director in South Africa, representing the United States and working with Nelson Mandela and his cabinet to bring about development and equality, I can't imagine that professional experiences get any better, or that a more noteworthy American could have represented us in our commitment to help him bring development to South Africa. Aaron, I hear rumblings that some development organizations are considering the possibility of an antitrust suit against RTI, asserting that with Asif stepping down from IRG, the return of your leadership to RTI gives a certain North Carolina organization a near monopoly of development knowledge and experience and sensible judgment. So be careful what you say tonight, as my guess is that your remarks will only strengthen their case. Aaron?
Morgan Freeman, huh? Herbie Hancock. Well, those are big shoes to fill from the South Side of Chicago. I have to tell you that I've been introduced a few times in my career, but that was probably the most unique introduction, George. And I don't even know how you actually pulled all that data together, but thank you very much. I'm really honored and humbled that you honored me with those remarks. But tonight we're here to honor another great American, my good friend, Asif Sheikh. And I want to thank Sid for giving me the honor of participating in this wonderful, wonderful evening to honor this great development professional. I want to thank Byron and Dan, and congratulations, Dan, for your service to Sid and service to our community. Catherine and George, and good to see you, Rodney, also, and thank you for your leadership. I have to give one shout out to a good friend of mine who's here representing the Peace Corps, Stacy Rhodes, Chief of Staff of the Peace Corps, right? And someone who also worked in South Africa during the tenure of President Nelson Mandela. Asif Sheikh is truly a Renaissance man. You know, a lot of times we'll hear that term, Renaissance man, and we'll think about individuals who wonder, what does that really mean? Well, in this case, we have a person who really personifies that term, and I'm sure that Dr. Cole, in her remarks, will delve into that Renaissance side of Asif, given the work he does with her at the Smithsonian. Asif and I first met in 2004 when I joined the SID board and he was the chairman of the board. And we immediately recognized that we were kindred spirits. We had a great love and passion for development. We also had a great sense of humor about the comings and goings of the political life in Washington, D.C. We shared many a joke about that as we observed life inside the Beltway. I enjoyed serving with him on the SID board, and I believe that we worked tirelessly to try to strengthen opportunities for young people, young professionals moving into our community to have an opportunity to learn more and network and learn from the more mature professionals who are engaged in our business. During this time, we also began to explore business opportunities between IRG and RTI, and we became very good friends in the process. We became such good friends that I violated one of the principal tenets of Washington, D.C. in terms of busy executives, and many people in this room will recognize this. On a very busy day at lunchtime, I stopped by Asif's office without an appointment. Now, you know, we all dread that. Everybody laugh, right? We dread that. Somebody coming by who you know you want to see, but you haven't got time. You're busy. You've got a schedule that's been set 2 weeks in advance. So I stopped by Asif's office, and Susan, his outstanding assistant who's here tonight, she let me slip through the door. And I said, Asif, I just had this thought when I was walking past your office over on Connecticut Avenue about something we might do together, our two firms, in terms of responding to a new aid initiative. And I said, I want you to give it serious consideration. I need to have an answer by tomorrow. So not only was I imposing on his time, I was throwing something in his lap that he probably couldn't respond to. But Asif, being the leader, the executive, the development professional that he was, he got back to me that next day, actually, and we did something together. And it says a lot about a person like that who, despite everything he has on his plate, when he thinks he hears a good idea, he's open to that idea, and he will respectfully give you the time you need to pursue it, even if you don't have an appointment. At the same time, I took advantage of his friendship to ask him to join a board of an organization where I thought his intellectual leadership could make great contributions. He thought about it, and he did, and that's one of the boards that George mentioned in his remarks. Asif is a great contributor to any board that he serves on. Now, what about Asif as a development professional? Well, George touched on some of this, but I want to just touch on a few things. He's an accomplished professional in terms of the development profession, ranging from agricultural transformation in Africa, leadership in the area of natural resource and environmental programs, and as a visionary thinker in assessing the need for and possible approaches to shaping the practice of development. He's a prolific writer and frequent lecturer at universities and international forums. And of course, he was widely recognized for his student dynamic leadership of IRG and the rapid growth and success it had in designing and managing development programs with USAID, other donors, and corporate clients. We often see in any corporate structure the man who's the CEO. But what about the person behind that? What's the real persona? What's the inner man about? Asif Sheikh is a man of the modern world. He's a global person. He is comfortable and well received in African villages, the boardrooms of corporate America, and the halls of USAID. He's well received in the halls of the White House. How did he become such a person? Well, he was born in Karachi, Pakistan. His father was a lawyer, a judge, and ultimately a diplomat. His family took young Asif first to Turkey when he was 6 months old, then back to Karachi, then to Washington, then to Nigeria, and on to Kuwait. So by the time he finished high school, this man was a world traveler. He completed his sophomore year of high school in Lagos, and guess how he did it, my friends? He did it by correspondence with the University of Nebraska. Needless to say, there was no internet in those days, right? He did it the hard way, right? He earned that degree. And this future Renaissance man during this time in Africa fell in love with African art. However, after completing his doctorate, he went on to his first calling to become a university professor at Drew University in the United States and at the University in Niger. But that was only going to be a brief stop, just a speed bump in his career. He had another calling, development. So he took a job with a consulting firm, and where did they send him? They sent him to Algeria, where he worked on a consultancy to look at the feasibility of rail car manufacturing in Algeria. Now, that's not development, Asif. You know, that's not international development at all. But what did he learn? He learned about the national economic dysfunction of that nation. He learned to actually do cost-benefit analysis. You know, a lot of people talk about cost-benefit analysis. He actually learned how to do it. And he learned it was not just an economic calculation. He learned about what people wanted to make their lives better, rather than what their rulers thought they needed to make their lives better. And he moved up the career ladder very quickly. He excelled in this consulting business. He had hit his stride. And so when his boss and a few other executives at the firm decided to form their own firm, they asked him to join as a junior partner. And so it became Energy Development International and subsequently IRG. He became well known in his work on traditional and modern energy and natural resources in Africa. He was instrumental in IRG, helping them win the largest energy planning project AID had awarded to date, the Energy Initiatives for Africa. He served as project director. He took on technical work in 20 countries in Africa. He was very busy. He was an accomplished professional, but that was not his last stop at IRG. They decided, and listen to this is very important, more important to me every day. At the tender age of 41, they made him CEO of IRG. That is quite an accomplishment, my friend, in any industry. And as they say, the rest is just history. During his 22 years at IRG, the company grew rapidly, becoming a major and respected USAID partner, implementing projects in over 140 countries. Your work stands on its own. Your talent, your leadership, your dedication, the team that you've built, the people who I've met who are your colleagues, stand on their own. It's quite an accomplishment. But this was not the only thing he did. Even though he was very busy, he was building a company, he was leading a company, he was engaged in development work, he also took time to contribute to this community. And of course, in 2004, he became president of SID. He took a talented staff and a board. I had the joy and privilege to work with him. And it turned an organization that was not exactly what it is today. We could not fill a room like we have today at that moment in time. Asif led that resurgence of SID, and he also, as an executive, and something that all of us are concerned about, the bottom line, he turned a profit, or as we say in the nonprofit world, a surplus. And today, SID is known as the Global Town Square of Development, thanks to you, Dr. Sheikh. Let me close by saying today he remains engaged in the development community in various capacities, and he continues to be seized by the concept that says the next 25 years of development must be different from the last 50. This is certainly a career that merits recognition by our community. Bravo, my friend, and congratulations.
Very nicely said, Aaron. Thank you. I mentioned that ASIF has a multifaceted characteristics, but Aaron and I have only talked about one half of ASIF. To keep oneself in personal balance, anyone working in Washington, where one's standing is driven first and foremost by your professional position, you need a life outside that profession. We are about to have a real treat to learn about that other side of ASIF, the side that few of us in this room know from someone who knows it very well. We are honored to have with us tonight to provide that perspective Dr. Janetta Cole, Director of the Smithsonian Museum of African Art. For those of you who had time to catch the NewsHour last night, you got an introduction to Janetta. You saw her passion. You heard her personal story of delivering to Nelson Mandela a quilt honoring him from the 41 institutions in the United Negro College Fund, and then her seeing that quilt in his home. For her, a lesson of connectedness across oceans, across cultures. Dr. Cole knows this other side of ASIF. ASIF is an avid collector of African art. As a member of the advisory committee of the museum, and as president of the board of the progenitor, the Robbins Center for Cross-Cultural Communication, the progenitor to the museum. Prior to coming here, Dr. Cole was an educator and a humanitarian. She is President Emerita of not one, but two distinguished historical black colleges for women, Spelman College and Bennett College. And she is also Professor Emerita of Emory. And I emphasize that because usually an individual wants to retain an association with such outstanding institutions because it adds to their stature. I think in this case, it appears that each institution wanted to retain their association with her because it added to their stature. I asked her how she came to move from the world of academia to the world of museum. All she would say is that it was through failure, through constantly earning an F-, failure and retirement from her 3 prior leadership positions. Dr. Cole came to the international arena in her chosen academic field, anthropology, which I think everybody in this room would admit is part of development, early. She was raised in Jacksonville, Florida, in a family that was alert to the bigger, broader world outside of Jacksonville and outside of the United States. And she developed an appreciation for art through the unique eyes, the keen eyes of her mother. She left home at an absurdly young age of 15 for Fisk University. But she forsook that great institution in my hometown of Nashville as an exchange program at Oberlin and a strange course in something called cultural anthropology introduced her to her professional calling. Field work for her doctorate at Northwestern took her to Liberia for 2 years, cementing the international orientation which she had grown up with. I will leave it to Janetta to describe her close relationship with ASIF that has been formed through their mutual love of African art.
Good evening. And what a very special evening it is. We've braved a cold winter night to come into the warmth of this gathering, a gathering really of kindred souls. women and men who are active in the field of international development. I sense that this is a room filled with folks who believe, as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. believed, that all of humankind is tied together, that all life is interrelated, and that we are all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Indeed, I sense that this room is filled with people who understand what President Nelson Mandela meant when he would use the Swahili term, Ubuntu. Ubuntu simply means that I am because you are, and you are because I am. And now to come to the part of this special evening when one among this group of highly accomplished professionals who work in the global arena will be honored. I can't tell you how fortunate I am to have the privilege and the joy of participating in speaking about this year's honoree, Asif Sheikh. You have heard from George and from Aaron a great deal about who Asif is as a professional. And so I will not repeat facts about that sterling career. What I do want to do is to speak about reasons, 4 of them, 4 reasons from among a host of reasons why Asif Sheikh is such an amazing and admired citizen of the world. The verse is this: that Asif understands the centrality of relationships, not only in making a good living, but in living a good life. Many of you who are here are the beneficiaries of the way that Asif cultivates and values friendships. My husband, J.D. Staten, and I feel incredibly fortunate to be counted among Asif's and Michelle's friends. There's a proverb that you can hear in Somalia that expresses the importance of friendships. It says, "To be without a friend is to be poor indeed." Asif is not only a trusted colleague and a friend to many of us, he is also a terrific father to his own son, a crazed grandfather, and a devoted second dad to his partner Michelle's youngsters. A second reason that Asif Sheikh is widely respected and admired is that in his own quiet but definitive way, he is a champion for social justice. Now, you will not find Asif on a soapbox, shouting his defense of some social cause or another. but you will find him always taking a stand in solidarity with those in need. I think that my colleague, my board member, my friend, my brother Asif, agrees with this proverb from Nigeria. The tortoise cannot progress until it sticks its neck out. A third attribute that characterizes Asif is his commitment to being of service to others. One way that he clearly expresses this commitment is by service on a number of boards. Surely you will understand if I choose to lift up as an example his engagement with one particular board, and that, of course, is the National Advisory Board of the Smithsonian's National Museum of African Art. Asif was there when it all began, working closely with a retired Foreign Service officer, Warren Robbins, when he began to collect African art and to place it in homes on Capitol Hill, one of which was lived in by the great abolitionist and feminist, Frederick Douglass. It was Warren Robbins who then petitioned the Smithsonian to take his collection as the centering collection for what went on to become the National Museum of African Art. If I could find the magic that would allow me to clone Asif Sheikh as a board member, I could quickly retire from the National Museum of African Art. It is his intellect combined with his graciousness and his generosity that makes him such a special board member. Now, there are many proverbs and sayings about the importance of service. My favorite is one that my parents repeated to me over and over again as I was growing up in Jacksonville, Florida. And I would not be surprised if in Pakistan, where Asif was born, and at least spent a few years before becoming a young global traveler, I would not be surprised if he heard a version of this saying from his parents. It is quite simply this: doing for others is just the rent you've got to pay for your room on earth. One of my sheroes, and I remind you that for every hero in the world, there is at least one shero. One of my sheroes, the great African-American educator, Dr. Mary McLeod Bethune, put the importance of service to others in these terms. She would say, go on, climb to the very, very top of your profession. You have every right to do so. But you must always remember to lift others as you climb. The final attribute from among many that make Asif such an exceptional and engaging person is this. Yes, he has a razor-sharp mind of an economist, but he also has a heart that sings when he encounters a quality work of African art. Now, while Asif is a collector of museum-quality African art, he also appreciates the power of every people's art to teach us, to inspire us, to confront us, and yes, even to unnerve us. I'm sure that Asif agrees with Pablo Picasso, who said that the purpose of art is washing the dust of daily life off of our souls. Now, when I bring into one frame these four attributes that so solidly reflect who Asif is, it's crystal clear why the Washington chapter of the Society for International Development chose to honor him. One final thought. Each of us would describe Asif Sheikh as a sterling leader in the arena of international development. That great leader, not of our times, but of all times, President Nelson Mandela, once said that a leader is someone with a big mind and a big heart. Asif, tonight you are honored as an outstanding leader, for indeed you have a mighty big mind and a huge heart.
Thank you, Aaron, and thank you, Janetta, for those remarks. And I think we all agree, for all of us who've worked with Asif or know Asif, and those of you who are learning about him for the first time tonight, that this truly is an extraordinary man in so many dimensions, and he's impacted the lives of millions of people all over the world. And he's going to continue to impact the lives of people. So it's with great honor and a great privilege that on behalf of the Board of Directors of the Society for International Development, we award Asif our Distinguished Award for International Development.
Byron and Catherine, thank you so very much. Dan, congratulations, and thank you, my friend. George and Aaron, thank you for giving my speech. And Janetta, remind me never to follow you again. I want to express my particular gratitude to the Sid Washington Board. I don't know what you were smoking when you selected me. But as soon as this is over, I'd like some of it. In fact, right now wouldn't be a bad time either. There are so many others here that are important to me, but that I cannot call out by name. It is a joy to have my mentors and my ex-business partners from IRG here, to have those I love, whether as my life partner or as lifelong friends, my co-conspirators in business or in 100 field treks. And there are a few people to whom Janetta made reference, who, because of very busy lives, cannot be here today. You know who you are, and thank you for being with me in spirit always. I cannot be more grateful for this wonderful band of sisters and brothers that fill this grand global town square of development that is Sid Washington. I am humbled, honored, and kind of overwhelmed. Wow. Wow. This is like attending my own wake. And, you know, you've been kind enough to come to my wake, so I promise to come to yours. You are wonderful. But I cannot accept this honor. I cannot accept this honor, except on behalf of and as a representative of the entire community of development implementers. This recognition does not belong to me, it belongs to all of us. But I'm the lucky one. I celebrate the commitment and accomplishment of this community for the work that you do every day around the world. Now, I'm going to talk about things that you probably already know, but I'm going to focus on just a few of those things that strike me as particularly important. And I'm afraid I'm going to be a little bit more serious than my predecessors because I'm kind of boring. The world around us is changing at what many experts are calling hyperspeed, sometimes driven by technology, sometimes by investment, and most often by changes within societies, often destabilizing and sometimes opportunity creating and liberating for the poor and underprivileged in developing countries. Now, this society, this wonderful organization, the Society for International Development, has always taken the lead in helping understand change and its implications for the lives of the most vulnerable. SID is a marvelous institution. 56 years ago, a hand of visionaries, including a hero to most of us, SID co-founder Andy Rice, 56 years ago, they set something in motion for which there was no category at the time, a space in which those from the so-called first and third worlds could come together as equals, coming together to seek to dismantle the systematic obstacles that had been put in place, often over centuries, so that some may prosper while others would not just stagnate, but would actually internalize that their situation was because of who they were. In the great Nelson Mandela's words, systems were in place that robbed people of their dignity. So we owe much to many people, and we owe much to Andy Rice. Without Andy and others like him, I and others like me and you would not be where we are today. Okay. My former colleagues at IRG, know that I believe in a notion that I like to call delusional confidence. Am I right? I have probably ad nauseum said to them that whatever we try to do, if we're not being slightly delusional, we're just not trying hard enough. Well, I owe that particular affliction to my parents, the most courageous people I will ever know. So, if you will indulge me, will you indulge me? I want to tell you for a moment about Mom and Dad. Dad was from a Sindhi Muslim landowning family. Mom was Christian. Against all odds and the shock of a traditional family, they met, fell in love, married, and spent their lives together. They were each heroes, especially to me and my brother and sister, in their own ways. The eldest of his generation, Dad, still in his early 20s, led an extended family of 72 who saw their crops fail and their lands lost from the village of Shikarpur to big city Karachi. He helped settle them all in dignity, if not always in great comfort. Through all of this, he assured that his brothers and his sister, and I might add subsequently his daughter, received world-class educations, even though it was almost unthinkable in the family at the time for a girl to receive an education. Dad banned, with moderately good success, burqas, veils, in the family, believing in his unshakable way that girls were just as important as boys. Dad had his own moral compass. Now, Mom was orphaned at the age of 7. She was raised by her grandparents, and at 18, she moved to what is probably now an unlikely place, the YWCA in Karachi. She educated herself and became a teacher. She spoke 7 languages and wrote 2 novels. Dad was a lawyer who became a judge and then a diplomat. So, a little vignette. In 1968, Dad was Pakistan's ambassador to Malaysia, a Muslim country with a substantial Chinese and Tamil population. During the awful, awful ethnic riots that broke out at the time, tens of thousands of minorities were killed. Mom, my mom, who on a good day was 5 feet tall, she placed herself atop the relief trucks, leading convoys to bring food and water to beleaguered Chinese and Tamil enclaves. She believed, frankly for reasons that escaped the rest of us, that the Muslim Malays would not kill the wife of a senior Muslim ambassador to Malaysia. Well, ex post, Mom was right. Thank God. And she was decorated by the King and Queen of Malaysia for her extraordinary bravery. That was Mom. They were rule breakers, they accepted risk, and they had, especially Mom there, delusional confidence, teaching me and my siblings that everything was possible if you tried hard enough. But this is not about Mom and Dad. Like all others on the subcontinent, they lived through the most terrifying of times during partition. The horrors on both sides are well known. So the point here is that in the 40s, For them and for millions and millions of others, the world had already changed forever. Lost homes, lost families, lost friends who are now on the other side of the divide, the loss of the very context and history that had defined their lives. The lesson that Mom and Dad taught us out of all of this trauma was tolerance and respect for all. Above all, I learned from them that whatever pain they may have suffered, they were so vastly many more who had suffered infinitely worse, and we should always be grateful. I learned about delusional confidence from how Mom and Dad lived their lives. So look at the people of the developing world today, and you will see billions who have lived through terrible traumas, billions who have been living through the most profound life changes for decades, often uprooting, sometimes opportunity creating, and usually inequitable. We live in a world that has been changing and where change is accelerating. I cannot predict those changes, but there are some major drivers that we cannot ignore, and we cannot stop even if stopping them were a good thing. And we are just beginning to enter an era of hyper change, not just in technology, but also in bigger things like social change and climate change. But you know, despite all of the things that are said in parts of this town and elsewhere, enormous good has happened in the developing world over the last 50 years. Success belongs to the populations and, yes, sometimes the governments of those countries. But we in this room can be proud of the role we have played, even if we did not always get it right. For the righteous and the judgmental, let us ask if anyone always got it right everywhere. Look around the first world. Look around our own country. Look around the first world over the last 75 years, and I think the answer is obvious. So we should not be surprised that no one always got it right in development. But someone got some things right. The Green Revolution, eradication of diseases on a global scale, the substantial reduction in famine vulnerability, the enormous growth in education, though still highly unequal, especially by gender, the slowing of population growth, even though demographic momentum will take us to 9 billion, the enormous growth in what I and some of my close colleagues like to call the demand for good governance, through spreading access to knowledge about rights and equality, things that once people know, they cannot unknow. The expansion of infrastructure and access to markets. The Sesame Workshop in over 100 languages for 1 billion children. Yes, Elmo should be the honoree this year, not me. The region I know best is Africa. And something has gone right in many parts of the continent, despite all of the misery and suffering. Now, Janetta and Aaron know Africa well, and they have often spoken eloquently about the continent. So I needn't dwell on data that you in this room already know. But Africa is on the move, and some remarkably good things are happening. In Africa and throughout the developing world, it's not all been for the good. But something good is happening in development. In the last 30 years, 1 billion people in Asia and Africa alone have been lifted into the middle class. 1 billion people. That is not trivial. Throughout the world, admittedly in highly uneven ways, there is progress, and it is accelerating. You know about it, so I need not belabor the point. Progress is happening, but if it were all so easy that we can sit back and simply say, it's happening, well, that would be truly delusional, even by my standards. Many of us are cautiously optimistic, but the challenges remain huge, the risks remain huge, but the opportunity remains enormous. Today, science and technology are already, in my opinion, the greatest game changers I have seen in my lifetime. People in this room know the potential. Through science and technology, we are seeing transformational changes that are profoundly reshaping how development will happen in ways that we can only begin to imagine. Now, for reasons of time, I want to address only a couple of key drivers that strike me as particularly important and that will change the context of development. Context is important because it changes what is possible in the future. You in this room know the nuances and pitfalls, so please don't come to me afterwards and say you left this out or left that out. You know, I know it, you know it, so let's just talk about a few things. Please. It's not about technology. It's about the rapidly changing context. I've spent the last decade studying and speaking about how the future of development will be and must be different from the past. And I intend to devote the rest of my career to how that future can lead to better development outcomes. That's what I'm going to do. But every time I think I understand something, I learn about something else that I can only begin to grasp, but I just don't understand. So I've had some time lately since I retired. I threw myself into learning all about 3D printing. It is widely said by experts, not quacks, by experts, that 3D printing will have a greater impact than the Industrial Revolution or even the digital revolution. I sort of get that. Manufacturing can become decentralized. 3D printers can print prosthetics, print shoulders and hips, and even rebuild faces. I got that, I think. But then I read an article about 3D printers printing human livers. I confess that I really do not yet understand. Although I'll drink to that. But leaders in science and technology do understand, and they say, and other leaders say, we are entering a period of hyper change in what is possible through science and technology, and hyper impacts from social change and climate change. To say nothing about Amazon drone delivery, which is kind of a mixed blessing. I wouldn't want to be the leader of that in the developing world. It's easy to say this is all sci-fi, but it is not. But to some who may still see it as sci-fi, let's go beyond what might happen, and let's focus on changes that have already been transformational in developing countries, but that we didn't even imagine 15 or 20 years ago. The role of information and communications technologies, not as tech solutions, but as agents of social and power changes. Power changes. Through Facebook and Twitter and cell phones and the internet, people now have access to ideas and knowledge in ways that we did not fully anticipate. We all know that farmers are using cell phones to know market prices in Bamako and Accra and even Amsterdam, no longer relying on truckers for a take-it-or-leave-it price. But just when we were amazed at the access to information that cell phones provided, we also learned that they can be vehicles for mobile money, mobile banking, and financial services, even for the dispersed poor. Not necessarily for the poorest yet, but the transformation has begun. These are fundamental shifts in power relations, and they are much more significant than technology itself. There are 1.2 billion users of Facebook. The country with the third largest number of Facebook users is Indonesia, the world's most populous Muslim country. Now, some proportion of Facebook users in Indonesia are women and girls, and they are internalizing new ideas and a new sense of rights. Personally, I suspect that the impact of Facebook alone, and it may be replaced by other things, my teenage friends tell me it's so yesterday, but whatever it is, Instapop, something will come up. It is my belief that the impact of Facebook and other things like it on gender equality will be greater than the sum of all development projects combined. Because through technologies, not just Facebook, but many others, hundreds of millions of people in the developing world now have almost equal access to knowledge and ideas as those in the West. That's remarkable. The Arab Spring, however, turns out, happened on Twitter and text messages and cell phones and the internet. The Second Iranian Revolution almost happened on Twitter. Millions of people in civil society have new tools for communicating and organizing that have changed the socio-political landscape forever. These genies cannot be put back in the bottle. You know, we are witnessing the most remarkable of things. From the changes that have already occurred, not sci-fi, changes that have already occurred. We are in a world where the biggest single change at enormous scale is in the world's most important resource, human capital. People are not just being told things anymore, they are able to reach out and seize knowledge. With this level of liberation comes the potential for good and for bad, even for evil. And we don't yet know how this will all be used or by whom, but it does as much to level the playing field as any force in history. So what's wrong with this positive picture? Well, the same tools that are allowing hundreds of millions to know in real time what we get to know in real time, those same tools that allow people to know also allow people to see. What they see includes growing, glaring, and often vulgar inequality. Inequality within countries is growing at an alarming rate. So GDP growth by itself, while a necessary condition, is not sufficient for poverty reduction. And there are powerful actors, and we sometimes forget this, there are powerful actors in developing countries, as there are in this country and in the Western countries. There are powerful actors that have a vested interest in keeping the playing field sharply tilted in their favor. They know how to do it, and they are willing to go to great lengths to assure it. For all the good things, all the progress, all of the positive potential, some developing countries may become ungovernable if equality continues to soar with bad governance and oppressive regimes. In an interconnected and interdependent world, if significant parts of the developing world become ungovernable, then there is a risk that our entire globalized world can become ungovernable as well. That's the smart power challenge. But that is also the challenge for development assistance for us. Two closing thoughts that will affect our role. One, I believe the greatest single change to shape the history of mankind will be the inevitable and unstoppable equality of womankind. There are forces that cannot be put back in the bottle. Timeframes will be different in different countries. I am privileged to serve on the board of Women Thrive Worldwide. This movement has begun, and it will prove to be the greatest social transformation in history. It will occur during this century, probably in ways that are agonizingly slow and difficult, but it will happen. Go ahead. That was agonizingly slow and difficult, but it did happen. Two, today, the donor world and all of us who work for it are tiny minority shareholders in what we call development. Today, 95% of the capital, ideas, knowledge, and technologies that will shape the destiny of developing countries come from the private sector, often with no particular development purpose in mind. Yet I firmly believe that the role of this community, even though we are only 5%, our role is not diminished, but it is more important than ever. Although the role we play as we enter this period of change must be different from what it has been. I don't know the answer, but here's the question. In a world where we will not control what happens, in a world where globalization and corporate investment can create great wealth in developing countries, but are really organized to create profit and enlarge markets, not necessarily to reduce poverty. In a world where access to ideas, knowledge, communication, and tools for organizing will inevitably spread and democratize, become available to all. In a world where frustration and anger, ambition and the desire to do good all coexist in uneasy proportions. In a world where power does seek to sustain itself, and the definition of fighting for good varies dangerously by the eye of the beholder. In this world that is about to change even faster, uprooting as many as it lifts up, in this world, what must we as a community do to help assure better outcomes from forces that we can only influence but do not control? Now, to me, it's not sufficient to say, localize everything. What does national ownership mean exactly? There are profound class and power interests and struggles within every country. I think we need a more sophisticated solution, and that there is a vital role for outsiders, for us. Anyone who believes that those who are left out and left behind do not need external advocates and external voices to help amplify their own voice has never lived with the oppressed. That is the challenge. It is time to bring greater urgency to the discussion of our changing role. We will eradicate extreme poverty, probably in our lifetimes, but we must not ignore the growth of extreme resentment. One is about good, the other is about danger. So I cannot be more grateful for this honor, and I cannot thank you more for your service. Let us continue to work together to adapt to the changing needs of our common mission. Thank you.
Well, I will take just 1 minute to close this lovely evening. The SID community gathers once a year to honor the best in our community for a reason. It allows us to take the time to acknowledge, to remember, to think why we're involved in this business called development, and allows us to celebrate those who are really outstanding. And that helps us reach a little bit higher and work a little bit harder when we go back to our daily lives. I want to thank Byron and Catherine for putting together this fabulous evening. Aaron and Janetta for sharing your personal insights, your lens on Asif. And I have to say, Asif, you lived up to your billing. You demonstrated in your remarks tonight that you are a thought leader who has a heart, that you're an observer of what's going on in the world, and you're always a step ahead of the rest of us in thinking through those observations. Every time I think I've caught up to you, you jump ahead. And I only resent that a little bit. I benefit from it. So the resentment's not high. Asif, you, in opening your heart tonight and in sharing with us the story of your parents, you have honored us. And we appreciate that. And so in honoring us, all we can say is it just demonstrates how much we love you and appreciate you and are glad that you're part of our community. Thank you.